Hello there, welcome to Plus Talk on Plus Life, where we're all about turning positive into a plus. Long-term survivor, we hear that term a lot in the HIV space, and joining me today is someone who I think we could call a long-term survivor who continues to thrive. Bruce Ward, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Carl.
As I mentioned there, you acquired the virus back in 1984, before really we were calling it HIV or AIDS. I think it was GRID back then. Officially diagnosed in 86. What were your initial thoughts when you heard the news?
At the time, I was also working in the field as an AIDS educator for the New York City Health Department, and I didn't panic over it because we were thinking at that point that maybe 10% of the people who were HIV positive would go on to get full-blown AIDS. So I was determined to take care of myself and do everything right, and so I wasn't very panicky at the time. That came later.
You mentioned there that you were an AIDS educator. Being a person then living with HIV, how much of your personal story and your experience were you able to share with people? Was that something you were sharing, or because of the stigma and the fear still surrounding it, was it something you kept to yourself?
When I was working for the New York City AIDS hotline, I did not share my information with people I was talking to on the phone. And then I became the director of the CDC National AIDS Hotline. I wanted to keep my life pretty much separate, except for a couple of people who knew.
So a lot of your focus today in terms of writing and speaking, we should mention that you are an author as well, is to keep the memory alive of those early days, especially for younger gay men. How do you do that effectively without the fear factor that obviously existed? Because we work so hard to change the narrative that HIV is not a death sentence, that U equals U, and all this great positive news. But if you want to, at the same time, educate and keep that alive, how do you balance that out?
It's difficult, and I think it's gone in waves. Throughout my 40 years as a long-term survivor, I've seen interest in the early days wane in different times. And I think right now I'm seeing more of an interest among younger gay men because they don't know very much about the early days. And so I think the fear is gone for them. I mean, it's not, once the cocktail, the protease inhibitor cocktail came out in 96, I think the big difference between the before and the after of that is that less people were dying around them. So it became less of a reality. So, I try through my writing and my talking and my public speaking to try to address younger audiences in general, but particularly younger gay men who are interested without instilling the fear and also without, bashing it over their head, because we don't want to play the victim.
What do you see today, in this day and age, that still reminds you of when this whole epidemic first began?
Well, COVID was very interesting. There were similarities and obviously differences between the early days, but it was triggering to all of a sudden have this pandemic where people were afraid of other people for different reasons and different populations. But in a way, it was interesting because it was kind of comforting that the entire world was feeling this now, as opposed to just parts of the segments of the population from before. I think it also prepared people who were long-term survivors or people who been living with the virus for a while, or around the AIDS epidemic in general. I think it made us more resilient and stronger and more prepared. I don't think I was as freaked out by the pandemic as many people were because they were experiencing this for the first time.
There were a lot of long-term survivors, though, that talked about sort of a PTSD and a real sense of here we go again as well, though, during that, oh my gosh, I've had to live through this
Yes.
once, now we have to do it all over again.
Yes. And I think it also triggered the feeling of like, well, the world didn't pay much attention to us back then. And now the world is paying so much attention to this pandemic. When I was working for the National AIDS Hotline, it was during the Reagan era. And, as we know, he didn't speak the word until his last year in office. So, we were battling that. The similarities with what we were dealing with at the beginning of the COVID epidemic, are there as well in terms of administrations.
As we look towards the future, and we know, thankfully, that there are many people surviving much longer, long-term survivors like yourself of HIV, that this now really is something that if managed properly, we can expect a full and healthy, normal, quote unquote, life expectancy. But what are some of the services specifically do you think that are needed, and where should we be putting our attention for long-term HIV survivors?
I feel that, and I'm part of a long-term survivor community, which has been very, very important to me because I think for a long time, many of us felt invisible and separated. And so it's important that people have come together on this. And I think many of us feel, and I feel somewhat disenfranchised. And yeah, I'm one of the very lucky ones. I'm not homeless. I'm not poverty stricken. But there are many people that we've forgotten who did survive that epidemic and are not need services, housing, just general health care. There's so many health concerns that are different from people who developed HIV after 1996.
Yeah, and also I think most importantly to community, and that sense of having that community and access to that community.
Yes, and I think that's also why it's been so important to tell our stories. I'm involved in a couple of groups. One is based out in San Francisco called Honoring Our Experience, and I'm involved in two different writing groups with them. And it's all based on getting our stories out there. I think we have to get our stories out because we're the ones who remember those early days. And once we're gone, it's going to be up to history to write the stories instead of us.
Bruce Ward, thank you for all you do. Thank you for your time. It's been a real treat to connect with you and have this, albeit brief, conversation.
Thank you so much, Bill.
That's going to do it for this episode of Plus Talk. If you want more information, check out our website, pluslifemedia.com, and please take a moment to follow us across social media. We are at Plus Life Media. Until next time, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.